Welcome to Behind the DM Screen. This is the WorldSmith podcast where we talk about tips, tricks, and failures of GMing Dungeons & Dragons.
Which there are plenty. Lots to talk about.
My name is Ian. I am the head of creative content at WorldSmith.
I'm Cameron. I run all of our socials.
I'm Matt, and I'm the CEO.
WorldSmith is a platform for GMs. You can go and generate balanced and unique content for your Dungeons & Dragons campaigns, and in the future for more TTRPGs. We were also just recently have launched a campaign generator and organizer, so you can go on there and basically keep notes and track notes for all of your sessions, storylines, campaigns, world building. It's very, very fun.
Very fun.
On this podcast, like we said, we talk about a different topic every week having to do with GMing. Before we dive in, though, we do like to answer a randomly generated question from our Discord. The WorldSmith Discord is full of, where are we at now? 2,000?
2,000
players. Yeah, over 2,000 players and GMs. They've supplied some great questions for us. We'll roll a d20 to select one of them. Before we do, though, we are going to roll for initiative to see what order we answer the questions in. Go ahead, Cameron. 16, 19 high rolls today.
Yeah, these are great.
And a 20. Holy moly. Wow. Too bad I never rolled that well at the table. All right, and here we go. We'll see which question we're doing. I will go first, then Matt, then Cameron. The question for today is question number 16. This is a question from Lore on our D&D Discord. Lore has asked, how do you deal with jealousy between a player and another player's character?
It's really on theme with today.
That is actually very on theme of what we're going to be talking about today. Jealousy. I think there's two ways to interpret this question. So I'm just going to go with, I have ever run into, I'm going to answer it this way. Sometimes, especially with newer players, I have run into a situation where, for example, a wizard player who has to learn spells and prepare them from a learn thing, then discovers that clerics can pick whatever spell they want from the cleric list at the start of every day. Yeah, and there's sometimes, I think, some class regret here. I have seen this happen where you're playing with first-time players, you get to level 5 or something, the game goes on, and somebody's like, wait a minute, why aren't I playing a rogue?
Yeah. Why did I choose Ranger?
Exactly. Ranger being a good example. Yeah. I think two big ways to deal with this, or I guess a couple big ways to deal with this. I'll just say one to leave other options for other people here at the table. I will say, as a GM, I think you clock that and then try to maybe find situations, in that situation, for example, with a wizard being this is lame. The cool thing about being a wizard that they may have forgotten about is that anytime you find a spell book, you can add spells to your list, and clerics can't do that. And wizards have way more spells available to them, which I think they also forget about. So a good example there, and this might not be what your question is about at all, but could be, for example, to, as part of your next thing of loot, have your wizard find a spellbook that has a bunch of cool spells in it that the cleric doesn't have, and the wizard then might remember some cool things about their character that they would have maybe forgotten.
There you go.
Again, that's me interpreting what you mean by jealousy between players. We'll see what the other two have to say about this.
Yeah, I interpreted it very much the same. I think very similar to what you said, just give the player opportunities to show off a little bit. So, I mean, this can mean if you have access to their character sheets on D&D Beyond or something like that, just look at what they're good at, or say, hey, this is kind of what they built their build around, and then just organically throw in some situations where they might excel. And if you do that, I think they're going to be really happy. They're going to feel like they're doing a good job. Pretty simple. Hopefully it works. But yeah, I think that'd be what I'd do.
This is a fitting question because I'm DMing a campaign right now, and I just gave all of my players tattoos. But these tattoos, it's
not real tattoos, right?
Not real tattoos. They're players.
I'm this is a hardcore D&D party.
In real life, you get this benefit.
They were in-game tattoos, and these tattoos give you magical powers. The issue is you need to roll a Constitution save to actually withstand the pain of the tattoo because of how big of a process this is. And we have this paladin who loves having a high armor. That's all that he does. That's his thing. And the barbarian rolled a godly roll on his Constitution save for a very high-end tattoo that gave him essentially the same armor as this paladin, but it's just like a passive effect. He can still have his unarmored defense.
Oh my
And I
gosh.
think it kind of pissed off the paladin a little
That's
bit, right?
understandable. I love doing things that make paladins angry, though.
Yeah, me too. You know, they're like clerics but dweebs, right? Yeah. So
I played Paladin in our last two gameplays.
We're aware. We know.
yeah. So what I'm planning on doing, if you're watching this, please, Paladin, stop watching. But what I'm planning on doing is I'm gonna give him like a special quest, right? And I'm gonna make him feel special by going and fetching some armor from this other guy, right? I'm gonna mess around with the god character that he's his patron or whatever. But like at the end of the day, you can make any character feel better or get stronger by integrating some kind of homebrew or like in character reason for why they are getting stronger. Yeah. I think any opportunity that you can take to integrate a character's backstory and belief and use that to empower a character, players love that. That's just my experience.
Yeah, that's a great suggestion. And to plug WorldSmith a little bit, WorldSmith has a feat generator and a magic item generator. And yeah, it's super fun to like go in and come up with a custom magic item that basically maybe helps out a player. And one thing I always like to remind myself, like in the party I've been running for a long time, there's some way overpowered magic items. I there's like an item I gave to my wizard that he can store spell slots in, and like it's super overpowered. It makes him so much better as a wizard. But like, you know, he doesn't have to, like, I can regulate that within my own game. You know what I mean? So sometimes I have to remind myself that like the sky's the limit. Like if you want to make your players godly, you're going to have to send harder monsters against them. But like, yeah, go ahead and give them some super powerful magic item that makes his armor class absurd. Right. But then you're just going to have to fight harder monsters, which is just going to make the game fun. So
right.
Yeah.
And no one ever is going to be upset that you're like throwing really high level monsters at them just because you wanted to make them cool and feel cool, right?
Yeah,
So,
like D&D players love fighting huge monsters.
Yeah, there's no downside.
It all turns out to be fun. Yeah. Well, good suggestions. And it does tie right into what we were going to talk about today. Yeah. So the question that we are kind of posing at the table today is, what do you do with difficult players? This is a question we've gotten on the Discord. I feel like we've all talked about it a lot with our other friends who DM, or talked about it even just at the office when we're working together. If you have GM before, or if you've been a player before and been at a table, you have probably had a moment where there's someone at the table who's just doing something that's ruining the vibe, just doing something that's hard to deal with. So yeah, we wanted to kind of throw that question out to the three of us, tell some stories of some times when that has gone on, and then maybe ways that it was solved well, or maybe ways that it was not solved.
Yeah.
So yeah, what's been your experience with this prevalent challenge?
I think just taking a step back for a second, when we talk about problem players, really, really broadly speaking, there are two types of problem players. There's problem players who are redeemable and like just are trying to have fun but aren't doing it in quite the right way, and maybe they just don't know they have like an idea but they just aren't implementing on it super well. And then there are problem players who the problem is the player, and they're just never going to be better. Really quickly, we can talk about that person first, because that is a lot of the time that can be the case. There's someone in your group that just doesn't work with who you're playing with. They don't meld with you. They don't meld with what the other people want to do. This is a collaborative storytelling game, so people have to be able to collaborate in order for the game to work really well. And if you have somebody that's just horrible and wants to play a very different game than everybody else, sometimes it just means you have to get them out of there, or something like that, which is like unfortunate.
Yeah. Also, this is just kind of like social skills, like 101, but like a lot of times people are ignorant of maybe how they come off to other people. So I would just suggest, just as just a general piece of advice for your life, but I would just suggest, if you're going to do that, don't secretly change when you guys are meeting your games to Wednesdays and then tell this person that you're actually meeting on Thursdays and none of you can make it. Don't kill them off in the game and then say, sorry, we can't have you re-roll your player, and then continue to play with the other players. Like, just have an honest conversation with this person, where you're saying, hey, like, you're being really rude to this person at the table, and like, that's hurting this person's feelings, and I really can't continue to have you showing up if you're going to keep being rude. Or, hey, listen, everyone else at the table, they really want to have a game that's really focused around comedy and having fun and building this world, and you seem really interested in this really specific thing, and that's really not going to work. You know, I think just have those honest conversations. I don't like you said. Sometimes with some people, that's not going to fix the problem,
Right.
but it's at least going to, I think, give them some closure on the situation where they can say, hey, at least I know why this is happening, how it ended. Maybe it'll give them something to think about and chew over so that when they go to sit down at the table the next time, they hopefully have learned a little something.
Yeah. I mean, prefacing this whole conversation, like anything, the go-to solution for all of these issues is most of the time going to be just communication, right?
Right.
I did have a friend once who would cheat. He would lie on his rolls. He would roll and hug, and then he'd lift it up and be like, "I got a 16," And
That's why I roll like this, dude.
Right. Oh, nat 20. Yeah, I should do that more often. Yeah. No, but there's some cases where it's kind of awkward, confronting them because they've been your friend for a long time, and it's like, am I really about to call out my best friend as a cheater, in a collective game that we love? And that can be, I don't know, it can be a little tricky sometimes. Sometimes talking to them, sometimes you just gotta call them out.
Yeah.
I think at a table.
Yeah. Unfortunately, and that's super awkward, and it's hard to do for most people, but doing it like that is always going to be better than saying, your example, killing off their player, secretly changing when you meet, stuff it's just going to be more drama in the long run because most likely they'll find out. Yeah. But if you just have an open conversation with people, it typically fixes the issue to a degree, or it makes them understand why you're cutting them off, kind of a thing.
I can remember actually a time when I was the problem player at the table, and it's kind of a funny story. I had driven down to San Diego to join my brother and my brother's partner who were visiting my brother's partner's family. I know it's kind of a long explanation, but so essentially I was kind of tagging along as the brother of the in-law, basically.
Yeah.
And my brother's brother-in-law wanted to run a one-shot based off of a module. They hadn't really run a lot of D&D before. They wanted to give it a shot. They knew that me and my brother had played a lot of D&D. And then there were some other family members who were also participating.
It's always the worst with family.
It can be tricky. It can be tricky with family.
Yeah.
I actually play D&D with my brother all the time and with other family members. But I think in this, the misreading on me and my brother's part for this game was we basically did not do, I think, our work as players to think through what's basically the DM's goal for this thing, right? Mm-hmm. And what his goal for it, I think, if I understand, in retrospect, was to basically be I want to try out DMing, right? I want to try running a game for the first time. I want it to be fun. I frankly wanted to just be straightforward, have a fun time at the table, just try it out. You know what I mean? Me and my brother, who had played a lot of D&D, we made the mistake of being hey, let's create let's build characters who are playing off each other. So we built these half-orc brothers called Ragtalk and Rogtak.
Oh, that's great.
Love it.
And they were both wizards. Okay. And we gave them really low intelligence scores. And so Rogtak was one level of wizard and 4 levels of fighter, and Ragtalk was 1 level of fighter and 4 levels of wizard. And so Rogtak could cast spells, but the spells, we had built this bizarre thing where he had the final words of the incantations written on his forearms, and so Rogtak actually had to prepare the spells for him, and then he would just say the final word to cast the spell. And they were combat wizards, and it was kind of based off of Thompson and Thompson, which are these comedy characters from Tintin. We just got so into this lore for them. We had a whole backstory for them. We had all these ways we were bending the rules of oh, well, actually he doesn't have a spell book. He has to use the spell book of the brother to all this stuff. Yeah. And we just ruined the session for everybody because ruins maybe a strong word. I hope other people had fun. But we wanted to get into this silly role play backstory situation, So we all started a tavern because it's a module one shot, and a halfling shows up and is somebody needs to go save this and this, and then me and my brother launch into this comedy routine of oh, we're not gonna do it until you give us this much gold and oh, we're drunk now, and and it was just what we should have done is just and the problem wasn't even in how we built the characters, but we should have just been great, we'll take the quest. Because it was just the guy who was running the game, he hadn't run a lot of games. He wanted to just have fun. He wanted to get through the module from A to B.
Right.
And me and my brother were doing this whole thing. The game ran 3 hours longer than it should have, ended at 2 a.m. I think people were pissed at us at the end. So it's and this comes down to we should have read the room better. Yeah. And then also I will say I do not blame the DM in the very least, because he was a new DM and he was trying it out. But I think now that I have more experience, I do think if you are a DM, I think the responsibility does come a little bit on your shoulders when you're setting up a game. Let the players know what type of a game you're going to be playing. Like, just upfront be like, hey, I'm really interested in telling a story that's going to work like this. You know, I want to play a very plot-driven story. We're not going to go on a lot of side quests. Like, the main thing is dungeon delving. We're going to delve a lot of dungeons. You know what I mean? Like tell people, I think, a little bit what to expect. You know, tell people like what the vibe is, and I do think that will help people show up with just the correct expectations, which essentially just like minimizes the chance of someone at the table doing what me and my brother did, and like kind of like derailing your game for you, basically.
Yeah, essentially. And honestly, just adding one other thing to that is a really good way to test things out is just running one shots first.
Yeah, sure.
You know, when you have an idea of something you want to run, when you run it as a one shot first with a group, you can find out pretty quickly how well the group jives together, if people are playing in the way that you expect them to, and if someone's not, then there's no expectations for like you guys to keep doing this months down the line or next week or next week or something like, you know, it's easy to say, all right, that was a great session, guys. Thank you for coming. See you next time, you know, whenever that is.
Yeah.
But if you have like, hey, we're going to run this really long campaign with all this group and you haven't played with them before, then there can become problems pretty quickly.
Yeah.
Campaigns can go for a long time. Like I have some work friends who we started playing a few sessions, and I ultimately thought we weren't going to get past session 2 or 3, and we're almost a year in.
Yeah,
and it's
totally.
like, you know, that's like a decent chunk of our lives that all of a sudden we're like good friends. And imagine if like we had that awkward coworker there who we just like what do we do? Just kick them out, and then you have awkward moments at work, right?
Yeah.
So
it's always the sessions you least expect to make it to a really long campaign that end up being the really long campaigns.
Yeah. And then there is like a level of finesse in like, well, I'll say two things. Like I think you address kind of, I think one thing, which is like, try to identify up front if this person is going to jive with the game, you know, and you can do that by playing a one shot first. You can do that by just basically pitching the type of game you want to play and see how they respond. If you do like a session 0 where people bring character sheets or build a character, that can also be helpful, because then you can be like, I think you're developing this character in a way that like is not like I would just suggest you to think about this maybe in a different way or something. I think there's lots of things you can do in kind of like pre-game. But then I think like the second type of player you talked about, like a player is causing problems at the table, but you're like, I want this person to stay in the game. You know what I mean? Like one thing I like to do is just like make, like if you have one thing that I have run into like a little bit, and it's not I wouldn't even say this is a problem at the table. It's just a funniness at the table. Is there some players who the way they deal with like tension is humor, right? So it's like you get into a potentially quite dramatic or tense moment in a game, and then somebody's like, you know, oh, I'm going to try to like seduce the vampire or something, right? It's funny. People laugh at the table. Now, that might be fine. You might be playing a game where it's just like a player said a joke, everybody can laugh about it, and then you can say, okay, but really, what are you going to do, right?
Yeah.
But if you have a player who's like serious, like, no, I'm like really going to do it. I'm really going to do it. One thing I like to do is just like literally just let players do exactly what they want to do, and then make them suffer the consequences. Just be like, you know what would happen, like within the world I've built, where vampires are actually like man-eating monsters, if you try to seduce this thing, then they will kill you.
Right.
And just have you do enough of that in the game of like a player who is always going off for their wacky ideas, always doing this. Again, that's not really it's not a game-ending problem, but it might be the type of thing where you're just like, oof, like this is just distracting the core party from what the core party wants to do. Then like just find like built-in world reasons to have them deal with those consequences. Like have them accidentally step into traps that deal them lots of damage.
Sure.
Have them like, and again, like within reason, like it can feel bad for a player if you just like don't even roll any dice and you're just like, you step in a trap and you die. Like that's dumb. like have them play the game. But like I think that's always for me when I'm playing with like a new party that's starting to gel. That's always just the way for me that I like gently get things on the same page, is just helping people be like, oh, this world is real. And if I mess around with NPCs, if I mess around with like if I'm like, no, it'll be funny if I go murder the bartender, then just be like, well, the bartender has brothers, and the bartender's brothers run a gang in the town. And now the gang has kidnapped all of you and stolen all of your equipment. And then the party's going to be like, that was really stupid that you killed that bartender.
Yeah. Funny, but no, dude.
And then probably the next time you're in a town, the player's going to be like, I probably shouldn't kill another bartender. So there's just like ways you can, I think about how like rather than being angry and be like, I wish that player didn't do that. Like, why did they do that? I think just think to yourself, okay, what's the ripple effect of what this can create in the world, and how can I kind of use it to bring the story like back together?
Right.
And I think if you do enough of that in your first 5 or 6 sessions, I think the players start to get a vibe for like, this is a real world with real consequences. Or maybe you're playing a comedy game, and in that case, like, go bananas and just have fun with whatever you want to do.
Yeah, be a murder hobo, do whatever.
I think you gotta find like that right mix between comedy and seriousness. My coworkers that I'm playing with right now, early on, one thing they were really bad at was they would constantly crack jokes. Like something serious is about to happen, someone's about to get executed, and someone's like, I throw a rock at him. I do a front flip to distract him, and they all laugh. And I'm like, okay, guys, actually, what are you doing? And finally, they, focus up. And I think that over time, you just kind of have to curate this, this balance of like, okay, most of the game can be fun, but then, when someone has a knife to their throat, like, let's take things seriously for the purpose of story, right? Because that's, immersion is like what D&D is, in my opinion. It's super important.
100%.
Yeah. I think also going back to the consequences thing that you were talking about, I think that's a really good way to deal with this stuff in general. I think you can also give them almost rewards, positive consequences for things that are really in line with the way that the game should be going. Or if you see them, because a lot of the time if somebody's running a wacky, zany character and they try to do these shock and awe kind of wild things that have really bad consequences, they still want to maybe do things like that in general. Sure. But they can have other outlets for that are actually conducive to the story that you're running. Sure. So you can say, okay, so maybe you can't just run up and pants the king in front of everyone at his whatever, but you can do that to the big bad in the middle of a fight or something while he's trying to cast a spell. And obviously probably better scenarios than that, but you can give them like areas or outlets for that kind of craziness for the character that they've created, but just make sure that it's not in a way that hurts the story, but in a way that helps the story, and give them really positive benefits when that happens.
Yeah, I think it's rewards are always good.
So what I want to know, like, what are your most awkward moments at the table? Like, has anything happened that I'll start with one. Okay,
so many.
I started playing D&D, and my dad wanted to like show he was supporting my new hobby, right? Yeah. And so he took me and my little sister to a game shop that was like an hour and a half drive away.
Oh, wow.
Because he was like, I'm taking you to the real deal, and you're gonna DM at a table.
Cool move from Dad.
Good dad.
Cool move
that's a
from
great
dad.
dad.
But I had never DM'd before. And so I was like, okay, I've been playing for like a little under a year. I got this. I sit down at the table, my younger sister to the right, my dad to the left. And then this total geek guy at the shop is like, hey, is this seat open? Can I play with you guys? I'm like, yeah, come on, go ahead. And this guy sits down, and he wants to pickpocket every single NPC I throw at them, right? I think we spent the first like hour and a half just like me trying to figure out the consequences of him pickpocketing and getting caught, and hiding and getting away, and then regrouping and then pickpocketing again. And it was the most awkward thing ever, because like here is my dad and my sister who have never played D&D before, and I'm just fumbling over dice, and you have this like 10-year veteran who's like ruining our game.
I pickpocket.
I'm like, why are you doing to me? Like, I'm this 14-year-old kid. Stop ruining my D&D sesh.
Yeah,
so
that's
any experiences like that? Do you have?
I was kind of saying this before we started recording, but I've been pretty. I almost always DM, almost never a player, and I play. I'm always in one consistent campaign, but generally not multiple, and generally I'm pretty selective with the people that I pick, and so that's, I would say, most of the awkwardness I avoid in the prep stage. I'll share 2 examples though of, I think, a moment where so I had been running a game at work, and it was running really, really well, and it was all brand new players, 100% brand new players. Yeah. And I think in my mind that was part of the reason why the game was running well, is that none of them knew anything else to expect.
It was a collective learning.
None of them were min-maxing. None of them were like trying to do anything weird with the story. They were just all 100% on board. And then we hired a guy who is a wonderful person. I'm going to go on to say very nice things about him, so don't get worried. But we hired a new guy at the company, And he found out we played D&D, and he was like, oh my God. He's like, I love D&D so much. And he showed me like this website he had built, like that was like for his campaign that he'd been running. And he was like D&D was his thing.
Yeah.
And he was like, can I play with you guys? And I got so nervous because I was like, oh my, like this guy's going to come into this campaign.
He's gonna ruin it.
And he's going to kind of ruin it. He's going to kind of ruin the vibe because he's just at he thinks about the game in a completely different way, right? And I remember calling my brother about this and being like, what do you think I do? And I'm really glad I made this decision. I was like, no, he wants to play. It's especially with this game, it was a game at an office. I'm going to let him play. He came in and he read the room very well. And he had built he had a paladin and it was a super strong build, right? He had this like air thing going on where he could, every time he attacked someone, he could push him back 5 feet. And then he had a halberd that had a reach of 10 feet so he could avoid opportunity attacks at every single, and he figured out all these ways to like, which was, I mean, he was playing D&D here and all my players were playing D&D here, right?
Right.
But he read the room really well and he went along with the story and he listened a lot and I could just see him like clocking stuff and it would come to his turn and he'd do these moves where I'm like, that's very strong. But he didn't make a big deal of it and he didn't play for anybody else. I was really worried that he would kind of step in and be like, you should cast this spell kind of thing. He just let people do their thing. He didn't ever say that was a bad move. Like, and I had a very similar experience with I had a campaign that was just 2 players who'd been running it for 2 years, super tight-knit group. And one of them kind of like told a third friend, we're playing this game and he was like, I would love to join. And then my friend got so nervous and he was like, I'm so sorry. I told him and we talked about it for like a week. We were like, do we let this guy join? And we decided to, and he's been an awesome addition to the party. So I think my story is less of like a super awkward thing that happened at the table, but I think like it's maybe the rosy side of this, which is like at the end of the day, like exercise kindness and people want to hang out and they want to have fun and trust, it doesn't always work out, but I think like, trust that, people at the end of the day are going to be able to have fun with a group of people. And it's not going to like your cool idea for your story a lot of times is not so precious and important that it can't like bear the weight of like one more person jumping in and having a good time has generally been my experience.
Yeah, I have so many horror stories. I did not do that. I have often, anyone mentions D&D and I'm like, yeah, I'll play. I think my worst stories actually come from, I was part of a group and this was an amazing experience, but we had college students who would go to local high schools and DM for all of these different high school clubs.
Cool.
So we have like 14 to 18-year-olds playing.
Killer.
And there were just a lot of awkward things, mostly because these kids haven't quite figured out what their sense of humor is yet. Yeah. And some of them are like trying to be flirting with other people in the game. And no offense, I love everybody. I was one of them when I was 14, but it's a little bit of a more awkward group. So I know one particular story there, but I mean, just lots of things where people are trying to stand out and it ends up being bad because they're trying to stand out and be almost the star of the story when it's really about everybody. Yeah. So don't do that.
I have a particular story about playing with theater kids.
Ooh,
theater and band kids.
We're the best. I love theater kids.
We've all been theater and band kids, so we're allowed to say mean things about them.
It actually didn't have much
friendly fire
with them being theater kids. I was also a theater kid, but my first ever girlfriend at the time, she wanted to run a session, and I was like, okay, I've been DMing for a couple years. I'll give you some advice. I have all the books. I'll print out character sheets for you. It'll be fun. She was like, okay, I want you to play. And I was like, okay. I recommend you invite like maybe 4 or 5 people at most, right? I show up to the session. There are 12 people sitting at this table.
Oh my goodness.
Oof, that's a big table.
This is her first time DMing. I guess she just like couldn't help but invite every single person she knew. Yeah. And she told me like, hey, I have a lot of people, so I need you to sit out. So I'm like, okay, I'll just like, I'll just stand out and I'll like kind of help as needed. And so I supply him with all this stuff. And
then you don't play.
The session's going for like 5 or 6 hours.
Yeah,
it's going for a long time.
Just the one combat is 5 or 6 hours.
I'm following
a single round of combat is like 30 minutes.
Nothing is happening. The story's not progressing. And I'm like, rough. I want to go home and like you have all my stuff. And I'm convinced that's the reason why we broke up.
You could never forgive her.
Well, I think it's just it was weird. There was this weird mentality with the band group because they kind of like singled me out as like wait a second, that's the guy who like wants to end our fun because he wants to go home after 6 hours of playing or whatever, and they're using all of my equipment, and
Yeah.
I think it was just like a really awkward
That's super
thing.
awkward.
That is awkward.
Yeah.
Showing up to a session and then being like, we have too many players, you have to sit out is so rough.
Wow. Okay.
And you're like, I prepped everything
Yeah.
though.
Like, have fun with my dozen sets of dice, I guess.
That's
Oh my
hilarious.
gosh.
So
Okay, well, we have to move on to the puzzler because we're running short on time.
Yes.
I will say one final thing though. I want this to be the cherry on top, which is, I think sometimes that D&D players can forget that they are surrounded by human beings at a table of normal human beings, and it is always appropriate as a GM to ask someone to not do something if it is mean. And so I just think even if someone is like, oh, I'm role playing my character, and they're hurting somebody's feelings, or they're insulting somebody, or they're saying something that is making someone deeply uncomfortable, like, is 100% always in your right as a human being, but definitely as a GM, to just be like, hey man, no. Like, don't do that.
Speak
like,
up.
you're hurting this person's feelings. Don't be afraid to speak up. Like, as soon as you say something like that, there will be a weight that will leave the room, and the whole table will be like, thank you. Even if they don't say it out loud, they'll be like, thank you for saying something because I was feeling really uncomfortable. So, like, just don't forget that at the end of the day, you're a bunch of human beings sitting at the table. If you were having dinner and somebody came over to your house and started, like, saying crap about someone that you love,
poking your food.
yeah, you would be like, you're being really rude, or you would ask them to leave. So, like,
Yeah.
it's at the end of the day, it's a bunch of friends at a table. If someone's being a meanie, just call them out on it. Yeah,
Well said,
role
well
playing
said.
does not give you a free card to do whatever you want. Okay. The puzzler for today
Yes.
is on theme and is being supplied by Cameron. So,
Yes.
so Cameron will share us a difficult situation at the table. Then we'll rely on you in the comments to comment how you would solve the situation, and we'll talk about it next week.
Okay, this week's puzzler. I had a dungeon master who I'd been playing with for. This is a problematic DM story.
Moving on from players.
Yes, I had a dungeon master. I'd been playing with him for over a year, and something he would do is whenever he would deal a massive blow to a player, he would ask them, how many hit points do you have remaining? And then he would deal
sus.
one below that amount the majority of times, so that he's leaving you on 1 hit point left. And at first the players were like, what? That's crazy. We got left on 1 hit point. How lucky are we?
The whole table?
whole table.
Wild.
And it kept going and going and going until next thing you know, I'm like, wow, a year's passed from my life. Not a single player character has died. But almost every session, every combat, a player gets dropped to 1. And they don't die. Well, one day I saw a dice rolled by the dungeon master, and he obviously lied about this dice roll. Okay, so my question for you in this puzzler is, how do you deal with a cheating DM? The god of the story, right? We don't want to offend, but do you call him out? Let us know in the comments.
Great. We'll look forward to your comments, and we will give our responses next week on next episode. Thanks
Great.
for hanging out, everybody. We'll see you next week.
Thank you guys.
Thanks.